This episode is sponsored by Fastly, the application security leader and edge cloud platform behind many top digital experiences. Fastly helps organizations deliver and secure online experiences for their end users through a modern, developer-friendly approach to security. With their next-gen WAF, bot management, and DDoS protections, teams have the tools they need to ensure their applications and APIs perform at their best without sacrificing speed or reliability. Discover how Fastly transforms security into an enabler for digital innovation at securityweekly.com/Fastly. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Identiverse 2025 is returning to Las Vegas June 3rd through 6th. Hear from 250 plus expert speakers and connect with 3,000 plus identity security professionals across 4 days of keynotes, breakout sessions, and deep dives into the latest identity security trends. Plus, take parts in hands-on workshops and explore the brand new non-human identity pavilion. Register now and save 25% with code IDV25-SecurityWeekly at securityweekly.com/IDV2025. And we'll probably have a bunch of folks on that are going to speak at that conference. That's something we do every year. They send me a spreadsheet of all the talks, and choose a few talks that seem interesting, and we'll get a preview of some of those. So always a good time. Very interesting conference focused just on identity. For this interview, Benny Vasquez joins us today to talk about Enterprise Linux. Benny is currently the chair of the AlmaLinux OS Foundation and has a long history in business and community building with projects like cPanel and a love of open source. Welcome to the show, Benny.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so this is a bit different from conversations we normally have on the podcast, but something longtime listeners probably know. I talk a lot about how important it is to kind of step outside the security bubble and understand how the rest of IT and everything works, because that often a lot of our constraints, a lot of the problems that security teams run into come from a lack of understanding of the kinds of problems and stuff everybody else is dealing with. There's a lot of security is the most important thing to the business that goes around in cybersecurity, and it's just not the case. So having the occasional reminder that revenue and uptime and infrastructure, a lot of things are more important than patching sometimes.
Yeah, they're at least competing, right?
Yeah, at least competing for that, and a lot of factors go into that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, let's I think it's a very interesting perspective, because you probably have a perspective of security that we do not have as well. But yeah, it's the vibe with Enterprise Linux particularly, I think is interesting to me, because oftentimes I forget that Red Hat Enterprise is out there and stuff like AlmaLinux and Rocky Linux and all these. So maybe give me some of the, the perspective there. If I'm a sysadmin, DevOps, whatever position I'm in using Linux, why does somebody go with like an enterprise distro over, just like an Ubuntu server or, something else, a Debian or something like that?
Yeah. The thing that I have always said to people is, honestly, wherever you get your start is probably where you stay. The reality is I started with CentOS because I started in web hosting. So CentOS was the one I knew. And that means that this is the ecosystem that I ended up in. But if you're looking at it from like a business perspective, like which one should I pick? The long the long benefits, the ones that have been around for the longest, are things like 10 years of support for each major version. So, for example, if I have a fleet of servers that are running AlmaLinux 9, I can stay on AlmaLinux 9 for 10 years. And running, security is important. And so having long-term support, that means that I don't have to do a mass upgrade across major versions for 10 years is good, especially knowing that it's actively patched long-term. The one of the other big things that pushes people is the vastness of the ecosystem. So we've got a bunch of there's there's one of these graphics somewhere. I don't know if you guys have seen it. I saw it on Wikipedia the first time, where it shows like, the Linux kernel, and then it just branches out all of the different versions of Linux that exist.
Like the evolution, like an evolutionary
Yeah,
tree. Yeah.
yeah, like this one's the upstream of this one, and this one's the upstream of this one, and it's gorgeous to look at, but it also tells you exactly how many times somebody says, "Actually, I like what you got there, but I think I can do it better." And
Yeah.
it's just right. That's how it always goes. But RHEL has been
I
around.
think
Go ahead.
I think that XKCD comic applies here. The one about standards, like
Yeah.
all these other standards are garbage. Now there's 15.
Yep. Yep. And then some of it is uh just instead of contributing to the thing that you are based on, you take it and you say, I'm gonna make my own thing. And that's one of the great things about open source is that you can, if you want to contribute, you can contribute, you don't have to.
Yeah.
The 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 decision between which family of Linux that you end up in almost always, from my history, depends on the sysadmins that are doing the research, right? Like they're gonna make the list. They're gonna say these are the reasons that I think we should go with this one, and it's anything that makes their lives easier.
Right. Yeah, I imagine, some may have, maybe it's easier to use Docker on one than the
Mhm.
other. If you're going to be a container heavy shop or something like that. I,
Yeah.
I imagine compatibility with other software packages and things like that maybe helps a lot there. Like
Yep.
I've used a lot of Linux distros since I think I first bought a copy of Red Hat at CompUSA in 1997, 5.2, by the way. And
Paying for your first
I
version of Linux.
I pay. Well, it was a very pretty box, blue background with
Uh-huh.
the red hat and everything.
I get it.
Looked very nice. And yeah, I put Fedora in a laptop a couple years ago just because I wanted Linux, on a secondary laptop, and it gave me anxiety because I use my work laptop for most things, which was a Mac, and every now and then I'd turn the thing on and find out I was a major version behind, or sometimes two, and and I didn't realize when I chose to put that distro in that laptop, which I did for compatibility on the laptop. It's a Framework 13,
Nice.
um, that they do 6-month major releases.
Yeah.
And it just blew my mind. I was like, it's not
Yeah.
been that long since I've opened this thing up. It just gave me so much anxiety. I was like, oh my God, how do I do? Like, do I
Yep.
have to reformat this? Like what's the process for that? It took me a long time to get used to DNF instead of apt also.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. Like, that's why I say, unless you have a motivation to try something new, you're going to stay where you start. You're just going to say, okay, this is what I know.
So kind of talking about like some of those factors that go into deciding. I imagine whatever you're comfortable in is a huge one,
Mhm.
But I imagine there's others as well. And one of the things we've talked about, and I think one of the places this dovetails into security pretty closely, is updates. Right?
Mhm.
Is the
Yeah.
availability of updates, the timeliness of that. I think a lot of organizations, a lot of vulnerability management teams are very aware of how quickly some things can start to get exploited if they don't update them on their systems. So I imagine for some organizations that's a big factor as well.
Massive, massive. And like, for example, and it is one of the reasons that you end up picking one OS over another, because almost always the OS that is closest to what you do or closest cares about the thing that you do most will be the one that fits best. For example, we got our start in web hosting. Like the biggest adopters early on for AlmaLinux were web hosters, and they was it early last year? I think it was early last year. There was an exploit announced that essentially, with very minimal effort, if you had an account on a server, you could have roots, and it took like 45 seconds. Like, it was trivially
Mm.
exploitable, and the it was announced or released, published in like January. I want to say in like early March, one of our users came to us and said, have you heard of this and why is it not patched? And we looked, and because we're downstream from Red Hat, that's normally where we start our patches, right? Like whatever Red Hat has patched, we will patch. And we looked, and Red Hat hadn't patched it yet. And so we looked into it further, and their user base doesn't appear to have a bunch of multi-tenant systems. So they hadn't really prioritized it. And when we saw that, we said, we know like web hosting, that all of that stuff is automated. Nobody's like, there's as much validation as you can do for that kind of system. But when you sign up for an account at GoDaddy, nobody's saying, okay, yeah, that's a person. And it automatically deploys an account, gives you an account. And that means that any of those devices could be rooted because like anybody got a user on that account and it's or on that server. Now they've got root access. So the web hosters came to us and said, guys, friends. And so we pulled in the patch from upstream, did a bunch of testing and released it. And that's one of the reasons that people end up coming to AlmaLinux if you're using multi-tenant systems, because we will prioritize that kind of stuff, right? Because we've got a big user base there. Red Hat serves its community by prioritizing the things that are important to them.
That the paid customers are, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's, well, I mean, and it's great, right? Like that's one of the great things about Linux is you don't like it, do it different, right? And that's what you
Exactly.
guys have done. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of choices out there. That's great.
Yeah. That's actually the reason that we got started. We, when the big shift with Red Hat and CentOS started, we, as users of CentOS, said, you know what? We've been complaining about what was happening with CentOS for a long time. This is our chance to fix those problems. And so that's what we've been doing.
Yeah. And I don't know how comfortable or how much you know about all the hot patching technology out there. That's something I haven't delved very deep into. It sounds very exciting, but like how big of a deal is that for folks? And when we say hot patching, this is specifically just the Linux kernel, right?
It is
Not,
often just Linux kernel stuff, yeah. But like, so I'm assuming most of your audience already knows this, but if you update your kernel, historically, in order for it to actually be incorporated into what's running on the server or on the device at that time, you had to reboot. And again, if you look at web hosting, where we got our start, most of the people involved in the project at this point started in web hosting. We know exactly what it's like if we've got 500 customers on a
yeah,
shared server. It doesn't matter how quick you can make the reboot. Those You're going to get
it's
at least a
disruptive.
quarter of those
Yeah,
customers being like, "Why is my stuff offline?" And so that naturally developed this hot patching stuff where you can, in while the device is still online, apply patches in a way that makes them not have to be rebooted. And that's the kind of thing that is really hot in systems where you can't have downtime, where you have to at least minimize it, right?
right. Yeah, and it's yeah, I mean, it's pretty exciting given, well, in a lot of the cloud, I think we've kind of and this is one of the news stories we have. I think in some people's minds, everything is cloud now, but there's still there's still colos in business. There's still bare metal stuff out there. Not everything is virtualized. And in fact, the item in the news we're going to talk about is how there actually is, we are seeing a trend of more people running stuff in their own colos and data centers and things like that. I
Yeah.
suspect some of it has to do with AI and people wanting to run those models, not have to trust a third party,
Right.
with the information that they're going to send them while using AI. And yeah, a lot of it I think has to do with privacy, data residency, that kind of stuff. But all of a sudden, that things like hot patching becomes a lot more important.
Yeah.
When maybe you can't set up a high availability, big cluster of web servers and stuff like that.
Right. If you're talking about one device that you need to keep online because, whatever reason it is, that's how it was set up. That's how It has to be set up, whether your budget is or your limit is budget or just hardware access or whatever. We did a highly scientific X poll a couple weeks ago where we asked where people were hosting their stuff, and overwhelmingly it was on-prem, like overwhelmingly. And that could be, the selection bias, because I said we ended up with a lot of web hosters early on, but we're not just being used by web hosters at this point, and it is very, very common to have people on-prem now.
Yeah. Well, it's insane to me to think about running with zero redundancy, like plus zero, because hot patching's great, but it can also be a massive security issue, right? Because if you don't have to restart things and they automatically take effect, you can unfortunately roll out a pretty crappy patch that instantly starts doing damage. So I think there's always I think the question is, why isn't there redundancy here? Because if you can't shut the server down to patch it, and not that hot patching isn't great, but what are you going to do when the server shuts itself down because it shits the bed? Because that's, it's, yeah.
No, yeah. I like the reasons on web hosting are all business specific. Like they are, web hosting is commoditized. You can get a web hosting account for $2, and I'm not going to set up redundancy for your $2 account, but you're still going to call me if the server goes offline.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
It's such a pain in the butt.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And, as I'm constantly reminded, I do a lot of advising on the enterprise side. There are a lot of, organizations that don't know how high availability works. They don't know how the cloud works. Like they're still doing things like they were 20 years ago because their one IT person never learned the new stuff because they didn't need to, because it kept working. Right. So it's, some of the stuff might be an easier leap than learning AWS, right? Like, okay, hot patching, that's something I can wrap my brain around after 30 years of using Linux, but AWS, EC2, and the other 380 products that Amazon offers there, maybe not.
I remember the first time I learned the
computer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I remember the first time that I learned something, like somebody told me that you didn't get a static IP on AWS. And I was like, excuse me? Like, how does that even, how would you, that's not how computers work.
Yeah. How does DNS work then?
Exactly.
I assume that assumes you're using Route 53 and like their own stuff, right?
All of the stuff that goes along with it. But it's, again, just like a learning curve, right? You've got to be able to stay on top of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, especially, small and mid-sized businesses do a very poor job of keeping their staff skilled. And there's nobody really, one of the phenomena you see in a lot of organizations is kind of willful blinders when you do have a security team in-house. Everybody else just ignores anything that has anything to do with a computer. And so, they don't even know how to assess whether their security team is 20 years behind the curve because they don't want to do anything that has anything to do with computers. So it's you see it a lot.
Yep.
So, Benny, if you look at the AlmaLinux roadmap, which might be public, I don't know, I didn't look for it, but
I wish I had like a pretty roadmap, right? As an open source project, that would be incredible.
I guess just in your mind, if you hold it in your mind,
for sure.
What you remember of it off the top of your head, how big of a driver is security for an enterprise Linux distro like AlmaLinux? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? Is it 1%?
So for the distro itself, I would say because of the nature of how we're building, we don't have to focus on security as much as most distros would, because we are, for better or for worse, we get to match Red Hat primarily and only deviate when we need to, right? It doesn't have to be as much of a focus for us as it would for like Debian or something, right? That doesn't mean it's not a focus for us at all, because we still have systems in place and we still have things that require security that we have to manage, right? Like our build system is our build system, and we still have to make sure that that's secure. So for us, I would say overall, it's probably a relatively small percentage of a driver for the operating system, but there are specific teams that have very high security focus, like the build team and the infra team, and they're all like they focus a lot on that kind of stuff, because if something happens, we've got what 4 or 5 million devices that are going to be impacted by it, and that's not cool. That's not something we're going to be cool with.
Make sure your ISOs and your package managers, all that isn't backdoored or like tampered with or anything like that.
Exactly.
I notice you also have your own SBOM tool, and SBOM is built into the build system as well. Is that a recent development, and how's that gone down?
That's so we're 4 years old now, and I think that was our second year. So you've had a fairly long time. It's continuously getting improvement from random people in the community and from one of our sponsors. They've I guess 2 years now, they've got a dedicated employee that works on SBOM for AlmaLinux. And for me, that's like one of the cool ways that you can support open source, to just employ somebody to go do cool stuff in the project. But the adoption of SBOM information and the ingestion of SBOM information is so different across organizations that it has been certainly a challenge for us to figure out what the balance is, how many different ways can we deliver this information, how many people are actually using it, how much work does it require from us, especially because like you said, there's so many people who are still using really outdated, really old systems to decide whether or not something is secure. What are they going to need when they finally get around to it? But we have seen a lot of really interesting conversations around SBOM in general. One of the organizations that came to us pretty early on was Cisco, because they started building their appliance OS on AlmaLinux, and they wanted to be able to do SBOM stuff. So they wanted to take our stuff, ingest it, and then be able to go out from there. And it's that kind of adoption that we didn't anticipate. We just thought people are going to look at it and use it for what they needed, not necessarily ingest it and then repackage it for using for their own stuff. It's those are the interesting conversations to me.
Yeah, it was. I'd never heard of ImmuDB before, if I'm saying that right. But it's kind of like blockchain-esque in that, that SBOM goes into an immutable database that anybody can go look at, and if something happens, you can go track back. Okay, when did things go wrong, or is that the same version that was shipped with it? Did it get tampered somewhere in between? Which I think is really important for. And the fact that you're kind of doing this work behind the scenes as well, because I can tell you, I've never downloaded an ISO, maybe twice, and run a SHA, verified the hash or something like that. I'm just YOLO, whatever.
Yep.
In my mind, the chances, the likelihood of this one distro being backdoored on the day that I download it and I'm the first person to get hit by it, I don't even bother. So the more automated some of this stuff can be, and the more you can do on the build side and in the back end, the better for us wanting to use it, that just can't bother to follow the instructions and verify our downloads.
I get it. Honestly, that's one of those things, one of those skills or pieces of knowledge that I only ever use when I'm downloading an ISO. And so every time I download an ISO, I have to go relearn how to use it. This is not in my head anymore, and spend 6 months. Okay.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. my Google results and now some of my AI chatbot results probably think I'm crazy for looking at the same command usage over and over and over again for things.
Yeah.
So a common so I want to cover one other thing first before I jump to this. You're talking about I was talking about bringing my Fedora up to major versions. AlmaLinux is backwards compatible, correct? I think you had a story here of people having old CentOS systems they needed to update here, which is kind of fascinating to me because the example you have, I don't think it would be possible in any other OS that I know of.
You're talking about using Elevate?
I don't know. You tell me. It's a story about somebody taking like dusting off a system from 2009, booting it up, and updating it to a modern AlmaLinux. Right?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories. So again, we're trying to solve the problems that we had as CentOS users, right? So one of the big problems in the enterprise Linux ecosystem is that it's not common for you to do, and wasn't historically possible for you to do major version upgrades in place. So if you are familiar with Ubuntu, you can do like major version upgrades. You don't have to migrate anything. You don't have to package anything. You just do it in place, right? That was not a thing in enterprise Linux. Like, unless you paid Red Hat to do it, it was not a thing. And when we started the project, we said, because of the nature of how we came around Red Hat, one of the things that happened was the Red Hat or CentOS 8 got its longevity shortened. When it was originally announced, the expectation was that it was going to have 10 years of support, and they shortened it to 5. And so there were a bunch of people who had already started incorporating CentOS 8 into their systems. And we're like, wait, now I only have like 2 or 3 years left in this OS, and then I'm just SOL. Like, this is not going to be okay. And so we worked on a fork of a project that Red Hat had open sourced called Leap to create this tool called Elevate. Elevate allows you to upgrade in place between major versions. And the big thing for us was that we wanted people who were stuck on CentOS to be able to migrate to a supported operating system without having to migrate their data, right? We wanted them to be able to upgrade in place because not everybody can do big mass migrations in a way that is going to work well for them. And then when we announced that, everybody was really excited. You could go CentOS 8 to any of the big name downstream enterprise Linux operating systems that you wanted to. And then we added support for CentOS 7. You could go CentOS 7 to CentOS 8. And that pulled a whole bunch more devices that had been lingering in like very unsupported lands and pulled them into AlmaLinux 8 or 9. And then just last year, we added CentOS 6 support. And the number of devices that were still running CentOS 6 and had been so out of date for so long was just terrifying to me as a sysadmin. Like, what are we doing?
Can you give me an idea as to the numbers?
So according to the numbers last year, when are you guys familiar with EPEL, the enterprise, there are extra packages for enterprise Linux? It's a big, massive project that is essentially like, if you want to use a piece of software on any of the operating systems in this ecosystem, you can go to EPEL and they probably have it packaged up. So like most of the stuff that you're going to get it doesn't come in the base OS. You're going to get it from EPEL, and it's a big open source project that's part of the Fedora project. They also published their numbers about like what operating systems are calling home for updates or looking for packages and that kind of stuff. And their numbers I think it was last year, was the last year that they published Enterprise Linux 6, would have been CentOS 6 numbers, and it was over 1 million that are still running an operating system that is 6 years out of date and still looking for updates. So it's not like it's These are not the ones that are air gapped. These are the ones that are actually looking for updates. And
and probably running web servers, probably have services open to the public internet.
Yeah. And there was one guy who saw the post when I announced it on Reddit and commented with, "I've got 5 devices that I'm going to go see, and if I can bring them up." And he got four of them to AlmaLinux 9, and one of them he could only get to 8 because the hardware was too old. But it was like just made me feel so happy. All of those devices that would have been problems and would have just continued to linger until the hardware failed or until they got rooted or like whatever, are now happy and stable and updated and not going to be problems for everybody.
And that probably did more to help secure like the world's devices than all the generative AI security startups that we have right now. Like the amount of tech that erased there just by giving people a path from an abandoned OS to a supported one. Like that's huge.
It was, we know that pain. And so we knew it needed to be solved. I honestly could not have imagined how impactful it was going to be. So we were at some conference, Supercompute, I think. It was Supercompute, SC. Yeah. And we came to, or there were some folks from Chevron who came up and said, "Dude, Elevate saved my life. Thank you." And I was like, "You're welcome. Glad to help."
That's great.
Yeah.
I love, I think that's a perfect story to wrap on. Benny, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show and talking about enterprise Linux and AlmaLinux with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Come back anytime.
All right, stick around. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.